In this week's episode, we'll be discussing the situation in Syria and David Cameron's plans for another coalition. I'm delighted to be joined by Mail on Sunday columnist Peter Hitchens, Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society Alan Mendoza, The Spectator's editor Fraser Nelson, and Isabel Hardman, editor of our Coffee House blog. Thank you all for coming today. On to our first topic, Cameron the Hawk. In this week's Spectator cover feature, Douglas Murray analyses how the Prime Minister has developed a love in government for the precision-guided bomb. In opposition, he wasn't interested in war, but he's now changed his tune, first with Libya and now with Syria. But just because there may be support for intervention now, can he bank on it from loyalty from his supporters? Peter, you've had a look at what Douglas has said. You must agree with a lot of what is in the piece and our leading article about the Syria case.
Yes, I do. I'm very pleased, particularly with Douglas's piece, because Douglas has, in many cases, been on the opposite side from me on these matters, and I'm delighted to see that such a trenchant and sensible person is now moving away from a desire to intervene in places where we can do nothing but harm.
Alan, you're obviously a colleague of Douglas's as well, but I think you're still pretty pro. You told the BBC recently that the latest developments mean we must intervene.
Yes, I do think we must intervene. I think if you look at Douglas's article, he does chart the transformation of prime ministers from domestic sort of leaders to foreign policy leaders quite well. His argument essentially revolves around we have cut our army too much to do anything, number one, and number two, anything we can do will solve no problems in Syria. Now, I think the first argument is, quite possibly correct in the sense that it does limit our ability to intervene. There is obviously a red line beyond which we cannot go in terms of being credible. But the second argument is wrong. I think it's actually inactivity that's led to the situation in Syria today.
Peter, what do you think?
Well, it seems to me that the intervention, diplomatic intervention, propagandistic intervention of several Western powers, not just us, but also France and the United States, has encouraged the Syrian rebels, whoever they may be, to believe that some form of Western military intervention will eventually take place. And I think if that hadn't been put forward, if they hadn't had that impression, we wouldn't now have had the terrible bloodshed, refugee crisis and general social catastrophe which Syria now is. I think people forget how bad this is. You need to realize, for instance, that tens of thousands of Kurds are currently being ethnically cleansed by our friends, the rebels from Syria, and driven across the border. They can't even get across because the pontoon bridges have broken under their weight. These are dreadful, disastrous consequences. And for what? What do we know about these rebels which convinces us that their regime, if it comes about, will be in any way better than that of Hafiz al-Assad or Bashar al-Assad, as I should say, since it's the same family but a slightly different.
Well, Peter's blaming our rhetoric for this, but actually the sad fact is there's been wholesale intervention already that's actually led to this situation. The rebels are being supported, Islamist parts of the rebels are being supported by Saudi Arabia and Qatar. They're getting more than words from them, they're getting arms, they're getting financial support. Equally, the Assad regime is heavily being supported by Iran, by Hezbollah forces who are helping it to actually engage in this. It's getting strong support from Russia. We're the only people who actually aren't intervening in this conflict. Well, and for us to take a step back and say it's been our rhetoric is completely wrong. Other people are intervening fully, and we're the only ones not. And as a result, the moderate rebels, and there are moderate rebels, Peter, there are plenty of them in terms of size and scope out there as part of the force. They are the ones who are losing out, and you will end up with this situation of having an Islamist opposition versus an Assadist state, and they'll fight to the death if we don't do something now.
I don't doubt that there are what you would call moderate rebels. So the word moderate is, of course, a word of very flexible meaning. Whether they would be in charge of whatever government resulted from a rebel victory is of course another matter. But I just want to take up one point you made there, talking about the Russians. The Russians haven't really intervened as such. What the Russians have done, and this is very interesting to me because I'm very keen on national sovereignty, particularly of my own country, is they've stood up for that principle. What their involvement really is, it's nothing to do with trade or arms sales or their ridiculous supposed ex-Soviet Navy base at Tartus. It is solely to do with Russia's view that the current policy of the United States and many of the other Western powers is a threat to national sovereignty. And Russia is now the only country which stands up vigorously for that principle. And it is
Why does it stand up for that principle?
It's a very good question as to why, but the fact remains that is what they're doing.
Because it's worried about its own national sovereignty. It's worried about the excess of the Putin regime.
It's certainly worried about some kind of inspired mob putsch against it, of the kind that's happened in Georgia and Ukraine to other governments in that part of the world. And why shouldn't it be? Would it be a person's? Would a person who is in favour of law-governed states of proper, legitimate transfers of power think that mob rule dressed up as people power was a good way of changing government?
Of course, but Russia is not a law-governed state.
Well, no, but I'm saying, will any country develop as a law-governed state if its existing government, whether you regard it as good or bad, but which is legitimately installed, is overthrown by a mob? This is a tactic which has been used against governments in that part of the world. But it's not actually the point that I'm making. The point that I'm making is that Russia's interest in Syria is not to do with a liking for the Assad regime, which I don't think there is. It's because Russia believes that this idea, which has grown particularly since the Kosovo intervention and Mr. Blair's famous Chicago speech, that all the principles of the Peace of Westphalia should be abandoned and that we should be free to intervene in other countries because we don't like their regimes, is a danger. It's a danger to Russia, but it's also dangerous to this country, and in the end it's a danger to the United States. Do you think China is not paying attention to the way in which we're behaving at the moment, and do you think it's not piling up precedents for its own future behaviour? Because of course it is, and I think it's good that for whatever reason and for whatever motive, anybody is standing up for national sovereignty, something which I ceaselessly, as I say, campaign for on the part of my own country.
Well, national sovereignty is one thing. That's one way of looking at it, of course.
It's my way of looking at it, yeah.
Very good. My way of looking at it is slightly different. It is that those countries trumpeting those claims right now are doing so for very cynical reasons, which is not that they actually support this idea fully across the international spectrum, but they're doing it to protect their own interests. They are doing it because the Chinese government, the Russian government, are worried about international condemnation of their own activities. You see China bristling any time a human rights issue comes to the table. You see Russia bristling at the Magnitsky Act, other things like that, the rampant corruption in that country and beyond, the failed judicial system. So of course they have their reasons for doing so. They've played this out into a great game, a new great game in Syria. Iran is doing the same thing. When you look at what Iran is up to, it is utilising the Assad regime as a pawn in its broader battle with the West.
What are the national interests of Britain in this? I really am completely baffled as to why there should be any national interest in this country in intervening in Syria, a part of the Middle East in which we've never had any particular interest.
Two reasons, two national interests. The first will be whether you actually regard moral reasons and humanitarian causes as being a national interest. Some people do, I do, some people don't. You may not.
Hang on. Then here I must turn back on your point that you just made. And you were talking about the inconsistency of the Russian defence of national sovereignty, and which is a separate argument. But I'm afraid your argument is very, very flawed, because you pose as someone who's deeply concerned about wrongdoing by certain regimes. And yet it's notable, and it summed up in the extraordinary article by Mr. Blair in the Times earlier this week, it's notable that many of those who see the alleged and so far unproven chemical attack by the Syrian government upon its own people as a crime which requires a military intervention of an entirely illogical kind, will not, and indeed specifically counsel against any kind of intervention in Egypt, where a government which is plainly illegitimate, which results from a lawless military putsch, has openly and beyond question massacred its own people with bullets rather than with gas, though I don't really see that a murder by bullet is any better than a murder by gas. And yet Mr. Blair is specifically, in his Times article, and I don't know about you, arguing against any kind of intervention in Egypt. Well, I don't blame him, but he can't really claim to be motivated by grief, woe, and a desire for justice if he says regime A can murder its population at will and we will support them, and regime B can murder its population and we will call for a military intervention against it. It simply doesn't have any moral, political, or philosophical consistency. Therefore, the real reason for your calls for intervention must be elsewhere.
Well, thankfully, I don't fall into the Blair camp on this, because I do believe the Egyptian coup is illegitimate. I believe the regime is illegitimate.
So you think we should be? You think we should be launching cruise missiles on Cairo?
Of course not. I think
Why
they're
not?
different.
Why not?
Because, firstly,
why not?
Bloodshed has ceased there. Number
has
one,
it?
It has ceased. Number one. Number
you
two.
can guarantee that, can you?
I can't guarantee it. There were going to be
the fact that bloodshed has ceased means that it no longer concerns you.
Not at
all. So if the Assad regime, the Assad regime, as you call it, has stopped allegedly gassing its population, which has never never even been proved to do.
Because I'd have gone in earlier.
Then you would say that
I'd have gone in earlier. I don't believe it's to do with chemical weapons.
You're completely tangled up on this.
I'm not tangled up at all.
Either murder is murder. The fact that someone stopped murdering somebody doesn't mean we say, okay, well, you've stopped murdering anybody now, we won't punish you for it. If you believe in punishing people for murder, you punish them for murder.
Absolutely.
Whether they've ceased murdering or not.
Absolutely.
Well, then what is this nonsense?
It's not nonsense
You
at all.
don't really believe it. You have another motive.
Absolutely not.
Let's find out what it is.
Absolutely. Let me give you the second point. So on that point, just on the point of where you go in, you have to take into account the different circumstances in each particular country. What you're falling now into the trap of saying, an absolutist position, just because you can't intervene everywhere, you can't intervene anywhere. That's a policy that can't be done.
No, I'm not saying that. I haven't said that at all. I'm saying
you're making that argument. You're saying to me, you must intervene everywhere. You're saying that.
I'm saying there are two totally direct parallels. The only difference between them being is that we have no proof. We have no proof.
One is a civil war situation.
The only difference between them is we have no proof that the Syrian government has done what's alleged against it. We have absolute proof and no doubt at all that the Cairo regime, military regime, putschist regime, has done what it has done. That is to say, slaughtered large numbers of people protesting against the coup d'etat. And you think we shouldn't intervene against the one and we should intervene against the other. It is an inexplicable position.
It isn't inexplicable at all.
It is completely inexplicable. It is insupportable and it's laughable.
Absolutely not.
In fact, here I am laughing at it. It is funny.
But I think you're wrong because the two cases are clearly different. I think in the Egyptian case, what you have is a situation where you have a one-off case of military action. Wrong. I condemn it. I think things should be done about it and the military should be kicked out of power. It has to happen. In Assad's case, you've had a 2-year civil war, 100,000 people dead, largely at his making, and an ongoing situation. What we must do in Syria is bring this to a close, just as in Egypt, we must bring the military coup to a close as well through a new constitution. In both cases, we have to do that. It's a question of how you get there. In Syria, the only way to get there is by intervening and forcing him to the table.
Constant musts and assertions of this kind, and also an extraordinary conflation there where you suggest that all the deaths in the Syrian war have been caused by the regime.
I said largely.
Well, largely, but is that so? I would have thought a very substantial minority, approaching half the deaths, could almost certainly be attributed to the rebels.
Spectators say about a quarter.
I just want to dive in here. You obviously both feel very passionately about this, and whichever way our listeners feel about Syria, we are slowly plodding towards intervention. Parliament is being recalled, Peter, as people are listening to this. What do you expect to happen in the next few days?
I don't know. I very much hope that every person of conscience and maturity in this country will be contacting his or her member of Parliament urgently in the next few hours to say to them, vote against this war. I think it would be an enormously important moment for this country if a vainglorious and posturing Prime Minister were to be told by Parliament at the prompting of the people that this kind of foolish, self-aggrandizing, selfish, pointless, blood-stained and dangerous activity was not welcome to the population. It would be really good, I have to say, if the leader of the opposition would find his conscience, or indeed something, and be the leader of the opposition and look, for instance, at Hugh Gaitskell's performance over the Suez adventure in 1956 as an example. I think his extremely vague vaporings on the subject up till now have been a grave disappointment. But if he won't do it, then I think the people of this country should make every effort, and the time is still there, to let members of Parliament know this is important to them. This is a fantastically dangerous proposal. There is no telling where this will end if we start lobbing missiles into Syria. And it's unbelievable that we should have been rushed into this on the basis of no proof and apparently American pressure, in which this country does not seem to be acting as a sovereign power, but as a sort of jackal.
And what about the Prime Minister as well? This will be the full transformation into Cameron the Hawk. What significance would a vote in his favour be, Peter?
Well, I think it would be extremely distressing. I think actually he would in future years be very glad that he'd been saved from this folly, because I think he has no idea what long-term damage it will do to him, his supposed place in history and his reputation, if he's allowed to go ahead with this. And I think we should save him from himself. But there is, of course, this problem. The Prime Ministers of this country are effectively chairmen of county councils. They can't even control how rubbish is collected in the country. Most of the legislation they superintend through Parliament is European directives. They have very little power. They say go and nobody goeth. This is the one thing they can do where they press a button and anything happens. I think they should grow out of reaching for this rather pathetic resort. And if they are really seriously concerned about showing themselves to be the defenders of this country's interests, they should start re-establishing its independence, particularly from the European Union, the main enemy of its sovereignty, about which we do nothing year after year. But that would be difficult, wouldn't it?
Briefly, Alan, can you round up on what you expect to see from the parliamentary vote and what it means for the Prime Minister?
Of course, I think on the parliamentary vote, I think the Prime Minister will get the parliamentary vote. I think MPs, after listening to the arguments, and I'm struck by how many would like to listen to the arguments, will come to the conclusion that the humanitarian and the strategic reasons for why Britain must intervene, the strategic reasons we didn't discuss, which include that if you allow Assad to win, firstly, you will have repeated use of weapons like this. Iran will be looking, they may be thinking similar things. You will see a strengthening of the Shiite crescent through the region. Terrorist groups like Hezbollah will be emboldened. The Russians will continue to be obstructive on issues like Iran, as well as the continued sectarian conflict, danger of Islamist blowback from a failed campaign in Syria here on our doorstep in Britain. All this will, I think, lead to MPs concluding the Prime Minister is right. He'll order a limited strike, I think, nothing beyond that at this stage. And then it's up to Assad to how he responds. Remember, there is a goal here. People say there's a goal. There is no goal to this. There is a goal. The goal is to force him back to the table. If he comes back to the table, then this will have succeeded. If he doesn't, then all bets are off and we'll have to see what happens.
Please be very careful about such terms as limited strike. If you, even in a street brawl, the person who actually launches an act of violence has no idea of where it might end. The possible retaliation from this act of violence could rapidly embroil us and others in much greater acts of violence and spread out like a great red stain from Syria for years to come and for thousands of miles. We have no idea what forces we're playing with here. An enormous conflict is in process between Shia Islam and Sunni Islam in the Middle East, in which we propose to intervene on one side. Why? What is our interest in doing so? We have a much stronger interest in not doing so.
Our interest is simply because it's already happening without us intervening. That's what's happening right now in Syria today.
Next, on to politics. In her political column this week, Isabel Hardman explains that while the Prime Minister is planning for another coalition, his Tory colleagues are actually plotting about what to do when they get rid of the beastly Lib Dems. Isabel, can you explain what the Prime Minister's Tory colleagues are working away on while he's thinking about another coalition?
Well, I think on certain policy areas there's clear disagreement between the Lib Dems and the Tories, but because the Tories have gone after Labour this summer, some of that has gone quiet. So they've decided that this autumn is the time to just remind their activists and their MPs that they love being Conservatives, not coalition ministers. And those areas are Home Office, Justice, areas like that where it's quite easy for both sides to disagree, and both sides see mutual benefit in disagreeing as well. The difference between that and another row, say, over childcare ratios is it makes the coalition look bad, whereas if you argue over immigration or human rights, the Lib Dems are very happy to say we disagree with the Tories, and the Tories are very happy to say we go further than the Lib Dems, so it suits both sides quite nicely.
Fraser, what do you think this means for the Prime Minister's leadership if his ministers are doing the opposite of what he's trying to think about?
Well, in a way, it's understandable that David Cameron's first priority is keeping the coalition show on the road. But he has done what a lot of people said was impossible. He has brought a functioning, even radical coalition into a parliamentary system which is adversarial, which was designed not to accommodate coalitions. The tragedy for David Cameron is this incredible feat is not particularly valued by anybody. His colleagues want to get out of coalition as soon as possible. Most of Lib Dem membership aren't wild about being in bed with the Tories either. So it's a trick not many people want him to repeat. Until now, though, we had understood that the main cleavage was between the Prime Minister, who was emotionally, politically, intellectually at home in the coalition, and his backbenchers, who wanted Tory-only government. But Isabel's piece reveals the extent to which Tory cabinet members are plotting for the day that they can start to turn their guns on their Lib Dem colleagues. And it won't be that this time next year there probably won't be a coalition, in my opinion. I think the two parties will have split apart and they'll be preparing for a general election. And it's striking, reading Isabel's column, the extent to which Theresa May, Grant Shapps, Chris Grayling are all planning for that blue on yellow action.
Would you like to put a date at when the coalition is going to split?
Not a precise date, but broadly speaking, I would say summer next year. It would make sense, I think, once you've got most of the legislation out of the way, because you don't need legislation to govern. you need a majority to pass laws. And in year 5, which is a Brucey bonus under the British system, we hardly ever have a year 5, you can get by governing, not passing laws. So I would say that the two parties come apart. I would say there's a Lib Dem leadership challenge this time next year. Nick Clegg goes, and they bring in another leader, better capable of fighting the Tories at election. Right now, my money would be on Vince Cable.
Isabel, if this split happens next summer, as Fraser predicts, do you think all of the Tory attacks will instantly turn on the Lib Dems, or will they still keep hitting at Labour, or are they getting Labour out the way now?
I'm not sure I'd bet on the coalition ending next summer based on the way it's working at the moment. Just my own impression is that actually that they're quite happy to go the whole way, but just to sort of pull apart in a sort of symbolic way as they head towards 2015. And I think that's what these ministers in the column are certainly keen for. Is some of them were quite sceptical about the coalition when it formed and would rather have governed by minority, but actually they've seen the value in getting things done, which you can do in the coalition, even if you can't get as much done as you'd like. But for them, what they want to do is just to start talking about their differences more and more. I know there are plans to provoke the Lib Dems a little bit more on legislation that Nick Clegg has tried to block before. So the Communications Data Bill may be dead in the water at the moment, but there was a plan, certainly before the summer, to try to revive it after the March 2014 budget, because the Lib Dems can't then bring in a mansion tax or anything like that. So there'd be less potential for causing chaos. I think one thing that will be really interesting will be David Cameron's conference speech. So if ministers like Theresa May and Chris Grayling are planning to provoke the Lib Dems a little bit over the next few months, they may well use their conference speeches to goad them as well. Now, if Cameron just takes the fight to Labour in his conference speech, it'll be an interesting divergence. Even if there's not a kind of massive Tory split between the Prime Minister and his cabinet colleagues, actually there'll still be this interesting contrast between a PM who just wants to fight Labour but is quite happy to work with Nick Clegg in harmony, but actually his cabinet colleagues would much rather attack both parties.
I've been struck by how harmonious the coalition has been over the summer, really. They've both focused their guns on Labour, and it's worked pretty well. But the net beneficiaries of this have ended up being the Conservatives. And this time last year, I remember going to Tory party conference and listening to Tory MPs compare how hopeless the next election was. Just there was no way we're going to get an election, a majority. Look how depressing things are. And now they're beginning to think, well, if this momentum keeps up, there's no reason why we shouldn't get a majority. Not because they're doing things so brilliantly, but because it's emerged that Labour hasn't actually done the reparatory work in those 3 years. Labour's strikingly unprepared for the next election. And I think the Tories are struck by how strong they will seem in comparison to a Labour Party that has ducked rather than taken the decisions it needs to. And I think this is what is focusing Tory minds on a blue future. And I was interested to read in Isabel's column that the distinction between the sort of clean fights the coalition tend to have and the dirty fights they don't want to have. A clean fight is something where they can disagree about immigration and both benefit.
We agree to disagree.
Well, but even we can beat each other up a little bit and we're both going to end up as winners, because Nick Clegg will look good to his target voters in saying we should let more people into the country, and David Cameron won't. Although, ironically, immigration is now one of the achievements that the Lib Dems claim for themselves, as Isabel writes. So, but it's interesting that they concluded that when they fight dirty, for example, when Liz Truss, Michael Gove's deputy, comes up with a plan for childcare and Nick Clegg vetoes it, this looks dysfunctional. This is a dirty fight. It reflects badly on both of them. But if they can work out where they can disagree, then you're going to have some, I wouldn't say staged fights because they're genuine disagreements, but they're trying to manage the violence.
To just touch upon the topic of the moment, how do you think the issues in Syria is going to play out between the coalition partners, Isabel?
Well, I think between the coalition partners there's unity. I don't think this is a coalition split issue. In fact, I was with a Lib Dem the other day when another journalist called him and said, well, we've heard the government response on Syria, what's yours? And he sort of said, well, we are the government. But I think what's interesting is what Tory backbenchers and what Labour backbenchers are going to do. Now, a lot of Tory backbenchers I've spoken to today are just undecided. They don't know how they're going to vote in tomorrow's vote on intervention. And that's partly because they haven't seen enough of the evidence, they want to hear what the Prime Minister has to say, and the motion hasn't been published yet as we're talking now, so they need to see the motion before they can decide how to vote. I know that the whips are being quite gentle at the moment, but I think that's partly because there's a lot more to come out before the Commons vote actually takes place. For Labour, again, it's really difficult just because of their history with Iraq. Actually, they have many MPs who are very uncomfortable with the idea of Labour supporting a vote on intervention, and they may even try to abstain, which would be very unimpressive, actually, for an opposition party.
Since the Syria situation has ramped up, Fraser, what's your view on how the debate and politics as a whole has been on the situation?
Well, it's funny. David Cameron has been pretty much alone in wanting to intervene in Syria, and arming the rebels was regarded by a lot of people, including the higher ranks of the military, as a bad idea. But since the chemical weapons attack, things have changed. And I've really been struck by how the Lib Dems have been using what I always thought was neocon language, that phrase, "we can't stand idly by." And this is straight out of the Blair textbook on liberal interventionism. Now, the Lib Dems, in a way, their great coup came when they opposed the Iraq war, and they got a lot of old Labour supporters for that reason. And now in coalition, I had expected Nick Clegg to kind of stay mute, to talk and say, well, this is a grim necessity. But he almost sounds enthusiastic now about punishing a dictator for using chemical weapons and accepting as his premise that Britain needs to act and intervene for humanitarian reasons abroad. This is exactly what Tony Blair said in the Chicago speech in 1999, exactly what George W. Bush said. And it's funny to see that coalition had such an effect, but it's been made difficult for the Lib Dems because Paddy Ashdown came out on Monday so strongly in favour of this, saying, well, even if the United Nations doesn't agree with it, I think the Lib Dems should too. He's still regarded as the kind of moral godfather of the party, and it would be pretty difficult for Nick Clegg to disagree with him. But it's funny, I mean, I'm just getting deja vu. Switch on the television, you see Jack Straw talking about WMD and UN weapons inspectors, and Blair, open the paper, there's Blair telling you to go for it. And it just seems like Groundhog Day at the moment, but not very many lessons seem to have been learned.
And a reminder of our special subscription offer for listeners of The View from 22. For just £22, you can receive a 22-week subscription to The Spectator with a print copy of the magazine, full access to our website, archive and all the apps. You can read everything we've discussed so far straight away by going to spectator.co.uk/22. And finally, Fraser, do you have a moment of the week?
Yes, it was when the Institute of Directors came out against high-speed rail, and they said it would be a gross folly. And I think this is quite interesting because HS2, I think, is one of the great big chimeras of our age, and the justification for it is that business likes it. Well, the IOD did a poll showing that 70% of its directors think this won't help them at all. The business case does seem to be crumbling. And it's funny because you can just sense a real momentum growing here, and one which I think will lead to it being dropped. The question is how long George Osborne is going to keep hold of an idea which his political antennae must tell him is already doomed.
Do you think High Speed 2 will still be happening after conference season for all parties?
Well, there is now such momentum behind it for so many lobbyists, so many people stand to get very rich out of this scheme. So I think it will last certainly for a few more months before the plug is finally pulled. And there are still supporters like yourself, Sebastian, who would gravely lament the collapse of HS2. But I do think it will, this time next year, they will have drawn a veil over this expensive, sorry project.
I'm not going to rise to the debate there and leave that one this time. Isabel, what's your moment?
I think mine was Jamie Oliver saying that he found it frustrating trying to teach low-income families about food when he went into their homes and saw massive flat-screen TVs. And you can sort of see where he's coming from, because I remember that the council estate where my grandmother lived, there was the next door house had a massive TV on the wall, and I always thought this was absolutely bonkers. But then I realised, particularly when I was a housing journalist, having spoken to housing officers, that actually these flat screen TVs normally come on hire purchase agreements. So the families who have them often can't actually afford them. They just get them on a credit agreement with a massive APR. And so it's a sort of illusion that they're spending all their money on other things.
It's usually more expensive than buying a TV, though.
Yeah, much more expensive than in the long term. So I could see his point, and maybe his point was more about sort of personal finance, which I think is an issue for everyone in this country rather than just people on low incomes. And also he's got a bit of a cheek, actually, because some of his recipes do involve slightly complex ingredients. And while I loved his Ministry of Food programme, I remember one clip where he was showing a mother who had been living off very expensive takeaways how to cook, and he produced some pancetta, which I wasn't entirely sure was a particularly helpful ingredient to use. Just one MP who I was talking to who works with low-income mothers in her constituency, she said that she was looking at some of the recommended recipes for living on a budget, and they involve things like plantain. So I sort of think the advice on cooking on a budget for people in general is not that great. And actually the problem is that we don't have a very good relationship with food in this country as a whole, rather than just people at the bottom.
I think it would be a great idea for Jamie Oliver to come up with a cookbook of things you can make from your average corner shop. And it is, I mean, a huge problem in Britain. There are huge council estates where you just simply cannot buy a vegetable. They are not for sale. And it's not that this is because people are poor. It's actually a lot more expensive to go to kebab shops and chippies and to eat out than it is to cook food in. But right now, I mean, a lot of people just are now, when I was at school, we were taught home economics, how to cook. And people don't know that right now. And if Jamie Oliver could help, I'd like to read his corner shop 20 luxurious dishes you can cook, ideally in under 30 minutes.
I'd certainly buy that. That's it for this week. Thank you very much to all our guests for joining, and thank you for listening.
The View from 22 was presented and produced by Sebastian Payne. You can read all the articles discussed in this week's Spectator magazine, available in newsagents and on the Kindle and App Store. Subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, or find more episodes at spectator.co.uk/podcast.